So we're really excited to be partnering this semester with the Bard College Center for Environmental Policy grad student class, the Politics of Solution course in particular. And so they've been doing work to really understand across the country what are some best practices, lessons learned related to watershed planning and management. And this is a question we've long had at the Hudson River Watershed Alliance. We're working really specifically in New York State and in the Hudson River watershed, but how are people who are grappling with similar challenges and concerns working elsewhere, and what can we learn from their inspiring projects as well? So we've partnered with the Bard Center for Environmental Policy, and I'm really excited to hand off the presentation, starting with Annabelle. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Annabelle. Welcome to Does Policy Sink or Swim? An overview of watershed management plans from 3 U.S. regions. I'm here today with my fellow classmates, as Emily said, from Bard Center for Environmental Policy. So, who are we and what are we doing here? We're all graduate students studying environmental policy and education. We're taking a class here at Bard called Politics of Solutions, as Emily said, led by our professor, Cale Roberts, and with expert learning from Emily Vail with the Hudson River Watershed Alliance. In this class, we take the form of a consultancy serving our client here, the HRWA, and helping achieve their goals around capacity building for local watershed groups in the region. So yeah, the purpose today is to share what we have learned from our research and interviews with different watershed groups across 3 regions of the US. This presentation will be just a broad overview of our key takeaways for the Hudson Valley region. So we won't be diving too deep into any one topic, but feel free to ask about specifics at the end during the Q&A. And we're really excited to share this overview with you. So we're just going to go over some research methods that we had. We really began our research by conducting what we refer to as a landscape analysis of each of our respective regions. This means we researched the physical environment of the region, also the water systems, the historical and political context of the region, and then also the environmental and climate-related challenges, and finally, the governance structures that influence natural resource management. So this initial phase of online research really helped us identify our key stakeholder groups involved in watershed management. And some of these groups did share a lot of structural similarities to the Hudson River Watershed Alliance, while others were organized much differently, but still played significant roles in their region. Many of the groups had successfully developed watershed management plans of their own. So after mapping out our key stakeholders, we reached out via email to potential interviewees who were specifically instrumental in creating these watershed management plans. So our goal was really to gain some deeper insights into both the successes and the challenges that they encountered during the planning process. And some of the questions we asked were like, what has been your most successful project to date? What is one key takeaway you have from doing watershed management and planning work? And also, what does your outreach and partnerships look like in your local region? So we did our interviews, and in total, we conducted 21 interviews across 3 regions. So we spoke to a lot of people, some who might be here on this webinar today. So thank you to all our interviewees that we spoke with. So the flow of this webinar will begin with 3 speakers representing the 3 research regions, which are the Pacific Northwest, the Great Lakes region, and then finally ending at home in the New York and Northeast region. These regions were chosen because they offer compelling examples of local water governance that share a lot of parallels with the HRWA. A lot of these regions also share similar hydrological challenges, as well as environmental concerns such as climate impacts from flooding or pollution concerns, issues that really mirror some of the ones we have in the Hudson Valley region. Then we'll move on to some key takeaways across the regions. So I'll do a little bit of a synthesis of what we found, and then finally we'll end with a Q&A. So we're going to start with Brendan, who will be speaking on the Pacific Northwest. Then we will move east to Liz, who will be speaking on findings from the Great Lakes region. And then we'll finally end at home with Srijan, who will be speaking from the Northeast perspective. And we're going to send some relevant links out when we send the recording of the webinar, and they'll also be attached to the YouTube page. So you can look at all the links of the organizations and some of the important projects that we came across in our research. So we're going to start with Brendan.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to make sure that I'm in frame here for everybody. Um, and thank you, Annabelle, and thank you, Emily, for hosting us. And good morning to everyone who's listening, and to those of you who might be further out west and up a little bit earlier than the rest of us. My name is Brendan Schaff, and I'll be presenting research conducted alongside my classmates, Pajal Lee and Jenna Holub on the Pacific Northwest watersheds. So, to begin with a brief regional overview, the Pacific Northwest includes all of Washington and Oregon and extends into parts of California, Idaho, and Canada. It's bordered by the Pacific Ocean, and the coasts are often associated with rain and fog. Less well known is that the Northwest interior is very dry and home to large-scale agriculture. The region is also internationally recognized and known for its biodiversity. So, as we all know, watersheds defy neat boundaries, and we can see in this fantastic map that the hydrology of the Pacific Northwest extends further than we might presume. It goes into Montana, Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, and deep into Canada. The Columbia and Fraser and Snake Rivers make up the region's backbone, and the Columbia River is the largest and longest. It flows over 1,200 miles and from Canada to Pacific Ocean. Water-wise, humans and non-humans alike rely on snowpack, seasonal precipitation, groundwater, and a network of managed rivers and streams. The region is facing significant watershed challenges, such as reduced snowpack, ongoing drought, and shifts in seasonal rainfall patterns, which have altered stream flows. This has led to warming streams, lakes, and rivers, which are killers for salmon and other animals. Additionally, some communities are also facing tainted groundwater with depleted aquifers, leaving others with dry wells. Now that we've had a brief overview, I want to share how water is governed out west. One of the big differences between the East and West is water law. In New York and in the eastern United States, landowners are primarily governed by riparian rights and reasonable use laws. In the West, they use something called appropriative water rights, or a hybrid of appropriative and riparian. Appropriative water rights allow non-adjacent water bodies to be accessed for things like pasture use and irrigation for crops. These rights are based on seniority and under the principle called first in time, first in right. And what that means is that older claimants are prioritized over junior claimants. And in a region that faces frequent water scarcity, this system can have significant impacts on livelihoods and create frictions over water priorities. How do different state governments approach watersheds in the West? We took a look at Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, and each had a different mix of strategies. But Washington and Idaho are mostly top down, but Washington does have a watershed group approach. Funding from the state for watersheds requires that the region has its own watershed group in order to receive those funds, and that group is responsible for plan development. Idaho is more of a classic top-down approach, but they do have something called a water advocacy group. And this is a formalized citizen-based group that can provide regional feedback on watershed plans coming down from the government. Oregon has the strongest bottom-up approach, and in Oregon, watershed governance is citizen-led and enshrined by state law. And this is a framework we're going to explore in the next section. So that concludes my brief summary of the region. But before I move on, I want to acknowledge that we were very fortunate to interview a number of individuals across private, public, and nonprofit sectors for a range of perspectives. These included researchers, tribal liaison, government employees, individuals at nonprofit organizations, and private water districts. So let's take a closer look. For this second half, we're going to go into two interesting case studies, one in Oregon and one in Idaho. First, we'll examine the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, which is the state's bottom-up approach to watershed governance. And second, we're going to look how a science-forward nonprofit in Idaho has bridged gaps between states, citizen, and watershed stakeholders to enable collaboration and ease friction and tension. So it's important to know that in Oregon, all water belongs to the public, and this is in state law. And anyone who wants to use the water, whether it's from stream or lake or an underground source, needs a permit. Oregon's modern watershed efforts began in 1987 with the creation of the Governor's Watershed Enhancement Board, and this was primarily environmentally focused on restoring salmon habitat and watershed health. Over time, this effort, though, evolved, and by 1999, it became a formal state agency called Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, or OWEB. OWEB's mission has been to support local and community-led efforts to restore and protect the health of Oregon's watersheds. Rather than running projects directly, OWEB provides grants to local watershed councils who know their regions best and understand their region's goals. So how does OWEB work and who's involved? OWEB is governed by an 18-member citizen board made up of voting and non-voting members. This is drawn from the public and approved by the governor. These include reps from tribes, the public, and leaders from state and federal natural resource agencies. The goal, again, is for OWEB to work with local watershed groups called councils to support watershed needs. Through grants, OWEB supports a wide variety of efforts, including salmon habitat restoration, native plantings, dam removals, fish passage improvements, education initiatives, and community events. It's quite broad. So funding comes from several sources. Federal grants play a large role, but a percentage of Oregon lottery revenue is set aside specifically for OWEB to use, as are the sales of salmon license plates in the state. Importantly, OWEB is just one part of Oregon's broader watershed strategy. And since 2012, Oregon's now coordinating water-related agencies under an integrated water resources strategy, which is updated every 8 years. Those agencies involved are the Department of Environmental Quality, Fish and Wildlife, Land Conservation and Development, OWEB itself, and the Water Resources Department. So that concludes our closer look at Oregon's watershed approach. If you have any lingering questions about Oregon, now's a great time to drop them into the Q&A box, and we can try to get to those at the end of the presentation. So now we're going to move on to Idaho, and we're going to look at three very closely named but distinct entities. And the first one is Henry's Fork, which is a tributary in Idaho. We're going to look at the Henry's Fork Foundation, which is a regional nonprofit working in the area. And we're going to look at Henry's Fork Watershed Council, which is a collaborative community group. So Henry's Fork is a tributary of the Snake River in southeastern Idaho. It's internationally renowned among dry fly fishermen for its scenic beauty and its trout-rich waters. It's also a working landscape, so there's a long history of ranching and irrigated agriculture. Concerns about the river's health led to the founding of the Henry's Fork Foundation in 1984. Decades of cattle grazing, trash accumulation, and several proposed hydropower projects threatened to significantly alter or damage the region's watershed. And from this approach, the foundation has always advocated for the river through a science-based approach to protect its stream flows, water quality, and sustain healthy fish population. It's important to note that water management in Idaho is very different from neighboring states. There are private irrigation companies and irrigation districts who hold and manage the water rights and disperse the water as well. In Henry's Fork, this is the Fremont-Madison Irrigation District, and historically, this has created some tension between agricultural stakeholders and river advocates, and this came to head in the 1990s when the draining of a reservoir threatened local fish populations. So in response, the foundation helped to establish the Henry's Fork Watershed Council to bring these two viewpoints together, those who are concerned about ecological health and those focused on agricultural needs. The council is co-facilitated by the foundation itself and the Fremont-Madison Irrigation District, who holds the water rights for the region. Together, they hold regular sessions and share updates and address concerns among the regional stakeholders. Though their early meetings and discussions were often contentious, the council has built lasting trust, and one irrigation district representative noted that conflicts at times between these stakeholders may be more perceived than real, and that face-to-face dialogue has helped to reveal shared goals. Over the last decades, the two groups have successfully collaborated on several initiatives. One major success was the automation and installation of water basin controls. The foundation helped secure the first grant from the state, and since then, over 30 controls have been installed, which has led to the retention of over 20,000 acres of water annually. This system allows farmers to use less water during irrigation season while also ensuring more water remains available for river use, which benefits both agriculture and native trout. In our discussions with both groups, it was also obvious that the council played a really important role in the region, that without the presence of the council, this area might go otherwise overlooked by the state government. So now I'm going to begin to wrap up my portion of the presentations, but before I do, I just want to talk about a few key takeaways from the region. So close ties to the land are powerful motivators for watershed advocacy. In Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, native fish species and beloved landscapes have served as a spark that have inspired community-based stewardship. Recreation and lower and local environmental values have also driven strong grassroots responses across many Western watersheds. Although it's taken different forms across Oregon and Idaho, small-scale local concern has developed into a broader advocacy and formal watershed planning. In Oregon, the widespread presence of watershed councils across the state and consistent support from OWEB itself has normalized watershed planning even in small and rural communities. Today, OWEB grants continue to support environmental health, but recent funding trends are starting to shift, looking towards new issues such as drought adaptation, wildfire resilience, and post-fire restoration along its classic restoration projects. Watershed works often starts from an environmental perspective out west, and this can be contentious. The groups that are succeeding are those that build bridges, and the Henry's Forks Foundation is a leading example. Their science-based collaborative approach has created meaningful alliances across historically divided stakeholders, and they've done this by creating space for diverse viewpoints. They've helped a region that was once defined by conflict and continue to resist outside development pressures that locals see as counter to their long-standing rural values. So as I wrap up, I want to reiterate that this is just a snapshot of a larger research project for the Hudson River Watershed Alliance. In our finalized document, which is still being created, there are going to be opportunities to explore other highlights, such as the roles that universities and colleges should be playing in rural regions, the power of local relationships and how they support watersheds in a unique way, and how watershed plans can be resilient across regime change and changes in politics. And with that, I'm going to thank you for your time, and this concludes our section on the Pacific Northwest. For this next portion on the Great Lakes region, I'm going to pass you along to my peer, Liz Riley.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to make sure I'm in frame here. I think we're good. Thank you so much, Brendan, for the overview of the Pacific Northwest. Now we're going to move to our second regional spotlight, and we will be shifting a bit to the Midwest to the Great Lakes region. My name is Liz Riley. I am part of the group that focused on this region with our desk research and interviews. My partners were Annabelle, our wonderful moderator, and Emily Inouye. So, the Great Lakes. In our interviews, we spoke with organizations solely in Michigan, Illinois, and Wisconsin, but the Great Lakes watershed region consists of 2 countries, 8 states, and 5 Great Lakes. The Great Lakes hold about 20% of the world's fresh water, and more than 30 million people rely on the Great Lakes for their drinking water supply. The Great Lakes region spans across more than 295,000 square miles, which is 40 times larger than the Hudson Valley, to put it into perspective. Although much like the Hudson Valley, the natural areas of the Great Lakes filter water, store carbon, and support biodiversity. So the Great Lakes watershed has a population of approximately 38.3 million people. People living in the area work in a wide range of sectors that drive the economy. Agriculture is an important economic driver, and major cities like Chicago support manufacturing and technology development. Shipping routes through the lakes connect the area to the global market as well, and tourism is also important in the area due to the natural beauty and different recreational activities. There are also many different universities and colleges in the area that support access to higher education. The Great Lakes region has actually played a significant role in the history of environmental advocacy. So it was instrumental in organizing the first Earth Day in 1970, which fueled the environmental movement. Today, the region remains a place where environmental conservation is important. Local watershed alliances, environmental nonprofits, and grassroots organizations work to protect the area. Indigenous communities, including the Chippewa or Bad River tribe, also care for the land through stewardship practices. So in the Great Lakes, there are a few environmental concerns, which expand broader than these 4 points, but these are the ones I'll talk about today. So firstly, I'm going to talk a bit about non-point source pollution, which in the Great Lakes is coming from agricultural runoff, urban stormwater, and road salt. So these are things that do not come from a single identifiable source, but collectively are degrading water quality in the Great Lakes, surrounding rivers and tributaries. Non-point source pollution leads to harmful algal blooms, unstable hydrologic systems, loss of aquatic habitat, and also high bacteria counts. Another issue or concern in the Great Lakes is erosion and sedimentation. Tree cover loss and increased rainfall in the past years has led to erosion of riverbanks and shorelines. So this has led to sediment buildup in waterways and has increased the risk of major flooding events. Flooding is also a concern here in the Hudson Valley as storm events intensify and sea level rises. There's also the concern of the potential risks of the implementation of pipeline and mining operations in the area. Accidents related to this infrastructure could threaten the region and also deplete resources. Lastly, there are the EPA's areas of concern, which are 43 locations around the Great Lakes region that are identified as being severely polluted. So this has happened due to histories of industrial contamination and has resulted in some habitat loss. So cleanup progress has been made in some, but many still require attention. So we spoke with representatives from 7 different organizations spanning national, state, university, and local levels. From the national level, we interviewed with one organization, the River Network, which has been in operation for 37 years. They have a team of 23 people who focus on building local capacity for water protection and advocacy. Even though the organization is national, we spoke with a person who is based in Michigan. At the university level, we spoke with 2 organizations, one being the University of Wisconsin-Madison Extension, which has been in operation for 118 years. They provide research-backed education and programming in Wisconsin. The other organization we spoke with was the Mary Griggs Burke Center for Freshwater Innovation at Northland College. They've been in operation for 10 years in Wisconsin, and they focus on freshwater research and community science. At the state level, we also interviewed with 2 different organizations, one being EGLE, which is Michigan's Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. They've been in operation for over 30 years. The department employs over 1,500 people, and they work on everything from permitting to watershed management. We also spoke with the River Alliance of Wisconsin on the state level. And this organization actually emulates the work of the Hudson River Watershed Alliance most closely. They have 8 employees who work to support local river and watershed groups and help them with policy education and technical tools. So then lastly, on the local level, we talked with 2 organizations, one being the Superior Rivers Watershed Association based in Wisconsin. They have been in operation for 23 years. They have 4 staff members, and they work for community-based monitoring and watershed planning. The other organization we also spoke with was Friends of the Chicago River, based in Illinois, which have been in operation for 46 years. And they have 16 staff members who work for urban waterway restoration and public engagement in the Chicago area. So the major takeaways from our interviews that we conducted fall under 2 groupings. The first grouping involves methods of watershed planning, and the second involves governance structures and collaboration practices. So under methods, the sub-takeaways are 1, that it is important to foster collaborative and inclusive planning early in the watershed planning process. And then 2, that the EPA's 9 key element framework for planning is of widespread use in the Great Lakes region specifically, and it is referred to as the EPA's 9 key element framework. In our interview with Superior Rivers, we learned that the initial stages of watershed action planning need to engage the community so that the final plan can be tailored to local needs. Under governance structures and collaboration practices, the sub-takeaways are: one, that the prioritization of peer-to-peer sharing and leadership development through transparency is extremely important in watershed work. And two, that the creation and consistency of data sharing builds trust among organizations through water quality sharing networks, data-driven decision-making, and volunteer networks that can be created through education and outreach. In an interview with the Watershed Alliance, we learned that they offer work groups on funding, advocacy, and management. They also do one-on-one work with groups, and they provide services for whatever issues groups are facing. Through multiple interviews, we also found that water quality monitoring can involve community-based programs and not only engage local residents, but partner with schools and other organizations. So one of our takeaways under the first grouping involves the presence of the EPA 9 key element framework in the Great Lakes region. So let's talk a bit about what that framework is. The framework is a standardized way for communities to create watershed management plans that are eligible for certain federal grants. The 9 elements include things like identifying causes of pollution, setting measurable goals, and creating implementation schedules. What is powerful about this framework, specifically in the Great Lakes region, is that it provides structure for watershed groups, but also a lot of flexibility. So it can be adopted to fit the needs of very different communities, from rural to urban watershed areas. Many of the organizations we interviewed are either using this framework or helping others implement it. So the standout case of our region is the Marengo River application of EPA's 9 key element plan from Wisconsin. At the heart of this plan is a shared vision: a Marengo River watershed that has clean, flowing water, supports healthy, diverse, and resilient plant and animal communities free of invasive species, and is a vital community of watershed stewards who take actions to care for the watershed while enabling a productive livelihood. The implementation of the plan occurs through the following flowchart. The main work group is the Lake Superior Collaborative, or the LSC work group, which is co-led by the Superior Rivers Watershed Association and other partner organizations. This work group holds regular meetings to coordinate the plan's implementation and evaluation. The group provides a forum to discuss watershed challenges and share updates. It aligns projects and funding and tracks accomplishments. Beyond this group, partner organizations and agencies play a role in making progress towards their shared mission. Their work is to hold events that are focused on information sharing, planning, and training, like symposiums, webinars, field tours, and workshops. They report to the LSC work group and share outcomes. Then, the regional and local planning efforts consist of comprehensive plans by local governments and tribal resource plans. They also aim to connect local governments and agencies to the plan to help with coordination and implementation efforts. This includes fostering active involvement of various communities. So now that brings us to the end of the Great Lakes section of our research, our regional spotlight. To summarize, the major takeaways from our research and interviews were the importance of community engagement, standardized frameworks like the EPA's 9 key element plan, and collaboration across organizations to build local capacity. While our interviews were focused in Michigan, Illinois, and Wisconsin, the strategies and concerns we saw reflect broader trends across the Great Lakes watershed, and they raise important lessons about how we can approach water governance and environmental planning closer to home. So now our journey will shift further east to our home in New York and the Northeast. I will pass you along to Srijan.
Thank you so much, Liz, for that great overview of the Great Lakes region. Now, for our third and final regional spotlight, we will be shifting, as Liz said, a little closer to home, looking at the watershed planning approaches here in New York and New England. Good morning, everyone. I am Srijan Bonik, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share some of what we have been learning. Over the past few weeks, Logan, Kiara, and I have been exploring watershed planning efforts across New York and New England through desk research and interviews with practitioners. These are some of the organizations with whom we have talked to. We talked to NewPeak, DEC, and of course, we talked to some practitioners from Piscataqua Region's Estuary Partnership in New Hampshire, Casco Bay Estuary Partnership in Maine, Champlain Basin Program, and of course, our very own birds, scientists, and experts. What I will share today isn't meant to be expert advice, but rather a synthesis of patterns and ideas that emerged from people working on the ground, with hope that some of these ideas might resonate with or inspire works in the Hudson Valley. Across the different watersheds, we notice the same four issues being brought up. These consistent challenges feel very familiar to Hudson Valley as well. Non-point source pollution, flooding and stormwater management, sea level rise, coastal resiliency, habitat restoration, and biodiversity. These challenges are not new, but it was interesting to see how different places are navigating them through their different planning efforts. When it came to planning methods, a few themes stood out across our interviews. My colleague Liz previously talked about the EPA's 9-element watershed plans. This could also be seen in our region as well. The Great Lakes region of New York, some watershed groups in the New York portion of Lake Champlain Basin are also exploring these plans as a foundation for future work. We also heard about adaptive management approaches, particularly in New Hampshire, where 10-year planning cycles allow watershed groups to revise goals and strategies based on new data and evolving community input. These adaptive plans are especially useful when dealing with issues like wastewater, stormwater, and climate resilience. In New York, the Drinking Water Source Protection Program was highlighted as a very strong model for encouraging intermunicipality or collaboration. This program helps municipalities work across boundaries to proactively safeguard shared water sources, something that feels really relevant to our context here in Hudson Valley. A newer planning model we learned was the integrated watershed action plans being piloted in the Great Lakes region of New York. These plans take a basin-wide approach and address multiple concerns like flooding and habitat loss alongside water quality. Most of the funding of this kind of watershed work in New York comes through the Department of State. Another very powerful insight came from Curtis Buchlan from the Casco Bay Estuary Partnership in Maine, who describes the process of planning as networking. In his view, a strong watershed plan is not just a technical document. It is a way to build relationship and foster shared understanding across a region. That emphasis on relationship showed up in other places too. We saw that plans tend to be more sustainably implemented when they're built through trust and collaboration rather than compliance alone. And finally, several organizations emphasize the importance of equity and access in the planning process. For example, the Lake Champlain Basin program saw increased community participation when they offered transportation stipends, childcare support, and flexible meeting formats. These efforts help them include voices that were otherwise left out. When it comes to governance, one theme that came through clearly in our conversation was community ownership and trust are the foundational step for successful watershed planning. One example we heard was the Geneseo Watershed Plan in New York. One of the state's early 9-element plans led by DC While this technical work behind the plan was solid, ultimately it struggled because local buy-in was not built in earlier in the process. This experience became a very important lesson for the future planning efforts. In contrast, the Seneca Nation's collaboration with DEC on an integrated watershed action plan showed that what's possible when community leadership is centered from the beginning. This co-developed approach fostered deeper engagement and a shared sense of ownership over the plan. We also saw the critical role of what several people refer to as anchor organizations. These are trusted, stable entities that help hold regional efforts together. Programs like Lake Champlain Basin Program in New York and the Piscataqua Region Estuary Partnership in New Hampshire serve as the hubs that support smaller municipalities and watershed groups. They do this by offering technical expertise, grant support, and coordination spaces that help turn fragmented efforts into a shared strategy. Ultimately, what we took away is that effective watershed governance isn't just about formal structures. It is about relations, trusts, and networks that grow and adapt over time. These insights around governance, from the importance of community leadership to the role of anchor organization, also helps us better understand what makes a certain watershed plan stand out. One example that brought many of these elements together was the Integrated Watershed Action Plan that is being developed by the DEC in the Great Lakes region. After our webinar, we'd be sharing links to all these watershed action plans so that you can have quite a quick look at this and take inspiration in your work from them. But what made this particular plan particularly compelling was their interdisciplinary scope. They don't focus on water quality alone, but also weave in land use, habitat restoration, and community resilience. It's a broader, more integrated way of looking at watershed health. Equally important was the way stakeholder engagement was approached in these plans. Rather than relying on public meetings, planners invested time in one-on-one conversations and drew on local knowledge to shape the plan in ways that felt relevant and grounded. Another insight that stood out was the internal work within DC to coordinate across departments and funding streams so that communities on the receiving end experience the process as more aligned, responsive, and less fragmented. This kind of integration, relationship-centered approach feels especially relevant for the Hudson Valley, a region where water challenges and solutions often span across jurisdiction, ecological, and social boundaries. Across New York and New England, what we heard again and again is that successful watershed planning isn't just about technical precision. It is about relationships, trust, and long-term capacity. Plans that move forward are the ones where communities are meaningfully engaged, where governance can adapt over time, where funding supports not just projects, but participation, where data is shared in ways that support local decision making. And in many places, it is anchor organizations that help make this possible by weaving together the people, tools, and partnership needed for sustained implementation. Thank you for listening, and I will now pass it to Annabelle, who will help us reflect on some shared takeaways across the three regions we have explored.
Thank you, Srijan. So I'm here again to sort of give us a wrap up of our key takeaways from across all three regions that we studied. So throughout this project, we've been exploring what makes watershed policy and management succeed or fall short in different contexts. What we found is that it's not always about having just a good plan on paper. It's really about how that plan is built and implemented, who is at the table, and how relationships are nurtured along the way. It will actually be compiling the following insights into a final in-depth recommendation memo for the Hudson Watershed Alliance. So again, this is just our broad overview. So back to our question, does policy sink or swim? Well, that depends. We found a few key takeaways from research and interviews across the three regions that put policy swing, so to speak. So the first one is to prioritize building relationships throughout the watershed. Build strong, ongoing relationships with stakeholders, including individuals, groups, organizations, and government agencies. Use the planning process as an opportunity for networking, not just for the development of a final product. People connect with real humans, not faceless institutions, showing authenticity and being transparent, which takes both time and consistency, helps break down government mistrust, and builds courage. The next we have is to create spaces to bridge differences between stakeholders. Communal spaces are vital. Tensions and differences are worked out when stakeholders come together. Misunderstandings, especially between government, environmentalists, and farmers, hunters, or loggers, often stem from just a lack of dialogue. When you bring groups such as farmers into the conversation through communal spaces like councils or collaboratives, they often care about water quality too. It's not just an environmentalist issue. Then we have engage your rural communities. Rural communities require attention and can sometimes feel left out of the conversation. Government solutions can often seem to serve urban or environmentalist ideas, while rural communities might feel as if, or actually do have competing issues. Rural development efforts can and should be leveraged to support watershed work. Prioritizing rural needs ensures a more inclusive and lasting outcome to your process. Then we should look at both regional and non-regional watershed frameworks. Looking to successful planning frameworks in both your respective region and in other areas facing similar concerns or governance structures can be very helpful. A structured approach to the process can help guide groups in watershed planning. We really saw that with the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board and how they utilize watershed councils. We also saw that with the Marengo River Watershed Plan, which used the EPA 9 key element plan framework, widely used throughout the Great Lakes region. And then we also saw that with the DEC's Great Lakes program, utilizing the integrated watershed action plans. Then finally, we have center community engagement before, during, and after planning. And this should really go beyond simple outreach. True engagement means building community buy-in. When people see their values reflected and heard, such as a cultural touch point of something like hunting or fishing, they're more likely to support broader initiatives like water restoration. This could lead to lasting cultural shifts and a shared sense of purpose and responsibility. Community buy-in not only fosters a culture of protecting waterways through education, but it also lays the foundation for creating community infrastructure, which are the networks, partnerships, and localized systems, such as collaborative groups or watershed councils. These systems support, they actually turn ideas into action. So that concludes our presentation. So thank you so much for listening. I just want to say that the most effective watershed management plannings don't just depend on technical tools or a strong written plan. It really depends on people. The soft parts of planning, such as building relationships, trust, and genuine community engagement, are what help policy swim rather than sink. This political cartoon here was drawn by our colleague Logan, and it really depicts this need for bottom-up community-centered approaches when it comes to watershed planning. And as someone who's studying environmental policy and education, this process was a really important reminder to me that real change often depends on social infrastructure, sort of the informal ways that we come together, that we share knowledge between each other, and help sort of keep the momentum going. Hearing the dedication from so many people that we interviewed, many of whom are quietly working behind the scenes, gave me a lot of hope. So thank you so much for listening, and I will pass it back to Emily for the Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much to the whole team for your presentations. So not only the presenters, but all of the students that had the interviews and compiled the research and shared all of these lessons learned. Obviously, this was a whirlwind tour of the United States and watershed policy. So I'm hoping that there's about 48 of us here in the Zoom today, that you heard something that might have piqued your interest, that you want some more information on. So if you have questions, again, please open up the Q&A box and put those there. And we've got a great one to get started, which is, what was the most surprising thing you learned during the analysis, and what concept will stick with you the most? So maybe each of you can respond to that.
Sure.
Surprises and analysis. I guess I can start here at the Pacific Northwest. I think one of the surprising factors we learned was the scale of difference across the region, but also how important nonprofit organizations can play, such as in the Henry Forks Foundation. That is one example where a nonprofit has sort of engaged the local groups and for decades has been supporting with science, real science, the watershed in a region that might be overlooked. And then we saw that flipped in Oregon, where in Oregon, almost the entire state is covered by watershed councils. So there's a history there that allows for even small towns of like 300 to have their own watershed plans and to work with OWEB to compete for these very powerful grants. And it showed that there was a deep investment across the state, but in different ways and in coming from different groups.
So in the Great Lakes region, I think one of the most surprising things, or maybe not surprising, but one of the most interesting things that we heard during our interviews was with Northland College, who does a lot of work trying to find community, like trying to find people to engage in the community. And the first people that they went out to were farmers and loggers, because these people have deep ties to the environment. They spend a lot of time outdoors and they truly care about the environment because of their livelihoods, but also because of their tradition, etc. And what we learned from the interviewee at Northland College was that these farmers and loggers tend to have bad reputations in the area. Well, not bad reputations, but they typically tend to think that these people aren't helping the environment, but they really are. And strengthening that tie to the community that these people are really caring about the environment and doing the special, like the good work, is very important. It's very important to uplift the people who are doing the work and not um, view them or take a bias to them.
And speaking of people, one thing that I really like when we were interviewing is how planning as networking, the concept that kept coming up, and how a lot of watershed planning efforts, especially couple of years in last 10 years, has been so much focused in just creating the technical document and living out people in the process. So it's really inspiring now to see how in the current efforts, we are integrating community buy-in from the start. So that was really interesting to see.
And I guess I'll jump in. Just one more interesting thing that I remember Srijan telling me about your region was one of the organizations who were really trying to focus on this equity based community engagement provided transport and childcare for their planning sessions, which I thought was really awesome.
Great, thank you. We don't have any questions from the audience. So audience, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. As the presenters mentioned, we'll be sending out links so that you can take a deep dive into any of these different particular plans. I'm really excited to take a look at some of these different types of watershed plans across the country and see where we can find some similarities and differences for our own planning work in the Hudson Valley. I have a question about the Washington structure for Brendan. And you had mentioned that watershed groups get funding and you have to have a watershed council to get funding with this expectation that the groups will then lead a planning effort. Can you talk any more about how that council structure works in terms of, whether it's that funding dynamic, or was it OWEB? Was the statewide entity? Just a little bit more detail about how those watershed councils in Washington are working.
I can speak very lightly to it because I didn't do the deepest personal dive on that. But what I understand from it is that it is mirroring in some ways Oregon's approach. And in Washington as well, the whole region is also covered by watershed councils. And I know that in Oregon, those watershed councils over the years have become formalized and they're nonprofits. And we can see something similar in Washington. And what it means is that instead of relying on sort of outside information, they're developing this sort of grounds up approach where they know who the people are in the region and who they can ask to understand what's going on, right? Not, if you don't have a contact in the area, you're going to struggle to understand truly what's going on. And this ties back into how a local individual has a really voice and great power in a watershed council, as they're called out west, because they might be recreational, they might have their own farm, and they can speak to the nuances that at the government level they can't. So I think that I don't fully understand how the structure is when it comes to watershed planning itself, but I know that each region has its own reach out, and that when they're looking to develop funds or to develop projects around problem areas, they know who to go to. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful.
Right. So we've got a comment, a great comment. In your report, please provide guidance on how to enhance community involvement at all levels. So this is from the Quassia Creek Watershed Alliance. I know that many of our watershed group partners are looking to improve community involvement. Maybe that's an issue that some of you could speak to, of some of those successful elements of how to enhance community involvement in planning. Anyone want to reflect on that? No?
Yeah, I can. We're just like, so
Everyone does? Great.
this is one of the surprising things about Oregon, and I know that we keep coming back to it, but watersheds, as we've discussed with you, Emily, are not just where the water is and where it goes, right? They involve the whole community. And because Oregon has this specific localized look in the sense that they care about the landscape, they care about native plants, they can get in a lot of community groups involved. And I guess to speak to how to get more community involvement, oh, I lost my train of thought. I lost my train of thought. This is happening live. So, this is what I want to say. OWEB has room for funding that. They are prioritizing that. So you could go and they have community events all the time. They have community meetings. They have community updates. They have walkthroughs and hey, let's mushroom picking and wild foraging and plant ID. So the watershed becomes this sort of sit-in for groups who want to be involved in their landscape, where they want to know more about what's going on with what's going on in their region. And so it's about the priority that, yes, does come up from a higher level. But then again, if you've got individuals who are already working, or you have that history played out a lot across the West, and I think we also saw in other groups, sort of investing in that history means that it's a slow build, but it does come together and it is very resilient. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's.
Great,
You
thanks.
else have a comment on that?
Sure. And another thing we noticed, and I think was really important, is in New Hampshire, they do this thing called the Adaptive Management Plan, where they're updating their plans every 10 years. And a big part of that is community input that is built in. So listening to the community, creating the space for people to give their inputs and making it accessible is something that is very important. In Maine, something they keep saying is Maine is a big, small town. So it's really important to create partnerships and relationships there. And something that the person we talked to kept saying is, when you're meeting people from the community, don't just show up as a watershed group, show up as who you are, show your honest self. And I think that is what is important, that one-on-one partnership building and relationship building. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think something we heard from the Great Lakes region is also to like meet communities where they're at and go to the unconventional places that you might not find expected people who want to be invested in what you're doing in your watershed management planning process. Go to the churches, go to the local restaurant, and have like a great pitch about, what your project is, I think was really applicable. And also back to like just making it easy and accessible and always having that at the forefront of your mind is really important. Think about the transportation that it takes to get to your site, and if that's a barrier, going out into the community, also providing childcare. Yeah, I was looking
Right,
at you,
yeah.
John. But yeah, and also having spaces like the Lake Superior Collaborative that focus on it's more peer-to-peer than engaging new people, but leaning on your support systems that already have volunteer networks that you could leverage as well. But yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Well, that brings us to just about time here. So I think it's really exciting to hear about all of the groups you've connected with across the country, some of which are very similar to the Hudson River Watershed Alliance, very inspiring and validating for some of our roles to support local groups as well. As the team mentioned, they'll be writing up their findings in a more formalized memo, which will be made available to all of you for more in-depth. We have recorded this session. It'll be posted on the YouTube channel for the Hudson River Watershed Alliance. You'll be getting an